when we first started our podcast, we had to get like probably 3 or 4 different websites and services going at once to record it, to edit it, to host it, and then have it approved through iTunes. And now we use Anchor by Spotify, where it's just a one-stop shop where you can record, edit your podcast, and when you distribute it, it'll go to all the platforms. So it's just everything right in one place. And the best thing is it's totally free. So if you want to get started, if you're on the fence about starting a podcast, or if you have a podcast and you want to make it simpler, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where we bring the mind, body, and gym together so you can improve your health, increase performance, and live your best life. For more information, visit thinkfitnesslife.com. Here are your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie.
All right. Welcome back to the Think Fitness Life podcast, Mindset, Exercise, and Nutrition with your host, Matt Gluckman. And I'm here with a special guest, Seth Oberst. He is a well-known physical therapist in the industry. He is located in Atlanta, Georgia, and he's been my personal physical therapist as well for the past 9 months, 8 months, something like that.
Yeah, off and on. Yeah.
Nice. And we're going to talk more about kind of the foundational aspects to the work that Seth does, get a little bit of insight into the specific work I was doing. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that Seth is working on personally in his fitness journey. We need to open up with the gut-brain connection. Let's start there. Let's talk vagus nerve, baby.
Vegas. Yeah, well, so, I think I find that, they call the gut the second brain for a reason, right? And so I think a lot of what we're doing when we're working with people's bodies is, I think, unfortunately, neglecting the influence of the gut on both behavior and movement, right? As well as the immune system and all these different connections. And certainly the gut has become much more popular in kind of popular culture over the last couple of years, last decade really. But it's predominantly been spoken about in the context of the microbiome, right? And making sure that you have appropriate bacteria and viruses and fungi in your gut and that you have appropriate balance. And those are critically important in terms of modulating the immune system and helping to liberate vitamins and minerals for the organism, the host, i.e. us, to ingest, to absorb. But I think what's neglected is that connection between the gut, the second brain, right, and our primary brain, right, and the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve 10, that traverses that space. And how we breathe and move also influences the dynamics, the rotational forces across the gut. And so a lot of what I'm doing is helping to reconnect the electrical system, right? So the vagus nerve, as well as the mechanical system, and get those working in harmony so that a person can feel better. Because the reality is we have a huge problem with functional GI disorders in this country. IBS, whether that's constipation or diarrhea, abdominal pain, acid reflux, hiatal hernias, inguinal hernias, all kinds of different, and then you have your autoimmune conditions, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, all that stuff.
And all that has seen an uptick in the past 50 years, right?
Oh, it's absolutely. Yeah, we've seen a huge increase in the prevalence. And, it's very rare actually for someone to come into my clinic in Atlanta because in some of my questionnaires asking about GI issues. And it's very rare for someone to answer that they don't have any issues in their GI system. And a lot of these are subclinical, right? So meaning they're having discomfort, but when they go to see their GI doctor or their primary care and they're being diagnosed with just very diffuse, abdominal pain, or they're told that, I don't see anything on your colonoscopy or your upper, your GI endoscopy. So therefore you must be good to go. And we know that, that's not a really good quality of life to walk around with having a lot of issues there.
And it's like they're living with the issues and it's only a problem when, pun intended, like shit hits the fan, so to speak. But it's kind of like underlying and dormant, and nobody can really help kind of pinpoint it and pull the problem out of the system because it's not large enough of a problem. Correct?
Well, and I think also we just had a normalization of, most people have some sort of gut problem. And so it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really, the signal doesn't really outweigh the noise. The people are generally quite unwell. And so then you just add a GI issue on top of that, and it doesn't go above the noise. But the way I think about it is this: most people can relate to having, at some point in their life, constipation or diarrhea, right? But if your dog had some of the bowel movement habits that you might have as a human, you'd be like, I got to take this dog to the vet. This dog's sick. But yeah, we have so many people walking around with these issues all of the time.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that I see is like these issues with, abdominal surgeries, whether it's for, colonoscopy, or not colonoscopies, but, different surgeries that they may have, and how they have different like scars and adhesions and mobility issues. And so that can be a really big issue as well.
Yeah, I want to circle back for a second and just kind of emphasize the importance of the gut. I think it's pretty common knowledge now to know that the bulk of our mitochondria stems in our gut, or is located around our gut. And the mitochondria, for our listeners, just is the powerhouse of the cell. And each cell has anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 mitochondria. So, the purpose of the gut being able to communicate with the brain is like the motor of a car having a computer sensor to tell it when to time, when to fire, and how to operate accordingly. So when that communication system is off, I think there's a huge range of problems that they can be experiencing. And kind of what you're talking about is like the symptom of stomach ache is just too small of a symptom to do anything about. I mean, maybe 150, 200 years ago, you might have, stayed in bed all day because you had a stomach ache, right? Like it was painful. Your body was at dis-ease at that point. Where now it's like a stomach ache is just a normal everyday thing. But I think, don't you agree that the symptom of a stomach ache can be a range of an inflammation response to just like minor discomfort?
Well, I mean, I think it's important
Pressure?
to think about. So, I mean, think about what is pain really, though. So, pain, right, or an ache, is your brain's perception of danger, right? Pain is the conscious correlate to the implied perception of threat to body tissues. So, if you're having abdominal pain, what that's telling us is that there is some perception of danger around the gut, right? Whether that, and if you think about what is the source of a lot of that danger, well, certainly it can be certain foods that you're eating, right? But it can also be how your nervous system and your immune system and your endocrine system, right? Because these are all very intricately linked, are sensing or perceiving the contents of your GI system, right? So we have all these little immune cells that are around and actually kind of periscope into dendritic cells is what they're called, but poke into the lumen of the GI system, and they're essentially testing or sensing, is what's in the GI system dangerous or not, right? So if we're ingesting foods or substances that are toxic to us, or we perceive as toxic to us, right, then we're going to create an inflammatory cascade. That inflammatory cascade can be hypersensitized by dysfunction in the mitochondria, right? It can be hypersensitized or by the state of our emotional system, right? Because that's going to influence how blood is flowing in and out of the GI system. So, there's a whole host of things, but at the end of the day, what I think really makes it simple is, where's the perception of threat? Why is my body perceiving danger in this area? Might it be there's too much pressure? Maybe I'm holding my breath. Maybe I don't have adequate mobility and motility of the organs. And so that's going to get signaled up to the brain. The brain's going to say danger, danger, danger. And it's going to produce an output of pain that protects us or motivates a change in our behavior. So if I have excessive pressure in my abdomen and I perceive pain there, right, then I'm going to sit on the couch more likely because it hurts to move. right? That's pain being an adaptive response. The problem is when that becomes persistent and chronic in its existence. When we're perceiving danger all the time, even when we don't necessarily, it's not actually a representative of actual danger.
Or even kind of, forgetting about the pain stimulus and just kind of like taking a Tums and getting back out there, so to speak. And
Right. So what's really being educated there is that, this is not significant enough for me to stop. So I'm just going to push through, which only perpetuates though this kind of disconnection between brain and body.
And you kind of hit right on the head of where I was going with it, is like, it's almost because we're educated in a way of, oh, you have a stomach ache, like not a big deal. Like you should wait it out, or take some Pepto-Bismol, take some Tums, and you just need an antacid. That's it. And then you'll be good.
Yeah.
And I think even just in the last 5-10 years, have they learned that an antacid alone is actually going to cause more problem, because we have acid gradients in our body, and you're going to throw off the balance just by throwing an antacid into your system that is almost really just trying to cover up the symptom versus trying to figure out the root cause. So
I completely agree. And I think I'd even take it a step further. So when you say antacid, you mean like a Tums or something?
Yeah.
Even more dangerous. And if we think about the concept here, if we kind of connect some dots for people maybe, is that you take like Prilosec or Nexium, which are proton pump inhibitors. So they reduce the production of stomach acid. The problem with that is that those are also anticholinergics. All right. So acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that is produced in the nervous system. And it's the main neurotransmitter of the vagus nerve.
Okay.
So your parasympathetic system uses acetylcholine to communicate. So what's interesting is that in people who take proton pump inhibitors for long periods of time, the studies show, or any anticholinergic, there's other classes, that they actually have an increased likelihood of lots of different mortalities, particularly.
Interesting.
Because the idea is that there's not adequate communication between and among the nerve and within the nervous system. Right. So so the point being, it's like you start to see how, these little things add up to be big problems if we don't address them.
Yeah. And you like understanding it from that angle, you can really see how this industry has just evolved and has so many more layers now. And we can look at something and say, no, that like taking a pump inhibitor or an antacid was like the old cover-up method of putting duct tape over it again, and it was just treating the symptom. It wasn't even ever finding the root problem. So do you do any sort of education with your clients, or maybe as assessments, to get them to understand how to address some of the things they may be already experiencing? Like, where would you go, maybe for our listeners, where would you go in instructing someone how to address discomfort in their gut?
Well, the first thing I would educate them on is what we just talked about with pain, right? Because pain is a really important thing to understand, because you have to understand that pain is a subset under the umbrella of the biology of stress. So in other words, you can be in stress and not have pain, but you cannot have pain and not be in stress. In other words,
say that one more time.
Yeah. I said that bizarrely. So you can have stress and not pain, but you can't. In order for you to have, if you're having pain, you're by definition under stress.
Under stress. Gotcha. Okay.
So what happens is that when a person comes in and they're having GI issues, the first thing we have to discuss is, what is your stress response? Because if your system is stuck in a pattern of threat or the perception of danger, it's going to change blood flow to your gut. It's going to reduce blood flow to your gut. It's going to change how you breathe, which is going to change the compression and expansion forces across your GI system. And then obviously, what you're eating and drinking certainly influences it. But my main purview as a PT is really understanding the mechanical function and the neurological function of the gut. And if people are chronically stressed because they don't have any self-regulation, then they're going to stay in a state of discomfort in their gut. no matter how much medication they take, or even if I'll even see a lot of people come in with great diets and still having all kinds of issues in their GI system. So we want to look at the mobility of the gut, the motility of the gut, and then, the status of the rest of the body and how well is the brain and body communicating. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. And one thing I want to specify is you said if they're unable to self-regulate. And I think
Yeah.
one thing that I want to distinguish here is that we're not just talking about like self-regulating, like going out for a walk when you notice your stress, although that is a portion of self-regulating. But I think we're talking more about the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah. So here's how I define self-regulation, right? Self-regulation, as I define it, is the ability to associate intense sensations in the body with a feeling of safety, mastery, and autonomy. So I'll say
Keyword safety.
That's right. So I'll say that again. So self-regulation is the ability to associate intense experiences or sensations in the body and associate that with a feeling of safety, mastery, and autonomy. So this does not mean that I'm zenned out all the time in a corner meditating, right? What this means is that when I experience intensity, my nervous system, all my body systems have the capacity to come out of that intensity and back down in a reasonable amount of time without excessive or even external inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So an example would be, I get stressed, so I just go take a Xanax. Well, that's not a self-regulatory strategy, right? That's external regulation. I'm using a pharmaceutical to regulate that. Or I only feel good if I run 6 miles a day. Or I'll feel great if I, go buy a pair of shoes, right? Those are not self-regulatory strategies. Those are compensatory strategies,
right?
That a person is using to try to manage the intensity that they feel like will never go away. So they suppress it or they overexpress it.
And essentially, a simpler way, or maybe a quick way to simplify what you're saying with the definition of self-regulation there is your body's ability to get hit and bounce back. Like That's it's right. Not how hard you can get hit, but how hard you can get hit and keep going.
So another way of thinking about it is this window of tolerance concept, right?
Okay.
So we want to have a broad, wide window of tolerance so that I can experience a lot of things and not be spun out or shut down because of it.
Well, I think we pretty much summed up what we're looking for there is the way that the gut and brain communicate and operating around a safety platform and being able to regulate oneself. I want to move on into more trauma, the hijacking of the vagus nerve, and the first steps in healing.
Well, so, I think the way I think about trauma is really and again, as a physical therapist, my main experiences in working with trauma are through how the body holds on to these traumas.
Right.
So, my interest isn't, right. So my interest isn't, the narrative or, story of it. That's where I work with some great psychotherapists that I work with my clients. But, the body really does kind of keep the score. And what happens is that when we have an experience that our body or brain perceives as overwhelming, we enact certain protective responses and strategies to that. So an example would be if someone's going to come up and punch me in the stomach, I might brace my stomach for impact so I don't get injured, right? But if I at that time was overwhelmed or unable to complete my survival responses, in other words, I was unable to stop the threat, my body remembers and holds on to that bracing of my abdomen, and it will repeat it over and over again in the future with any similar type stress. So it doesn't have to be every time someone wants to come up and potentially punch me in the stomach. It might be just thinking about it. It might be hearing other people describe it. It might be talking about, so you see this kind of expansion of that traumatic trauma to include all these other things that are even slightly related. It might be, the time of day or the sound of someone's voice. So the body holds on to these cues in an effort to try to survive. The problem becomes when our adaptive responses continue to get more and more limited. So we have less and less of a variable response. And so we're walking around basically all the time with a braced gut or a braced stomach. right?
Say that last part one more time. So this becomes basically habitual, and we stop with our adaptive responses, and we
Yeah.
do more of like conceptual responding.
Well, right. So what happens is that, this concept of variability, right? So variability would be the ability to adapt to a response with a wide variety of behaviors. So, when we look, for example, at other motor strategies, for example, gait, so walking, highly variable strategy is a healthier strategy. So people walk a little different. Every step is not quite the same, right? As systems get, another example would be heart rate variability, right? Which you may have talked about before, right? So if you have a higher heart rate variability, your system tends to have a more autonomic capacity.
It's ready.
As it gets more rigid, it becomes more predictable and less healthy. The same is true with our responses to stress. If we respond the same way over and over and over and over repeatedly to stressors, our system starts to wear down. The allostatic load, the load on the system, becomes higher and higher, and we don't have a way to cope.
Is there a technical term for the way that we click save through these survival experiences?
What do you mean when you say click save? You mean like how we kind of hold on to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the easiest way that the kind of technical term that I found in the literature is capturing. So what happens is that behavioral response that we enacted during a stress or during a trauma is captured by subcortical structures, basal ganglia, and different areas in the limbic system. And that becomes part of implicit or procedural memory, which is subconscious, right? So we have autobiographical memory, right? The narrative memory, that's my name, my story, where I'm from, the things I can recall. And then we have our implicit or procedural memory, which is our bodies, basically body memory, right? My repeated, my ability to go get on a bike and ride it without having to describe to you how I do it. I can just do it, right? That's the trauma response. And that is held in implicit or procedural memory. And that's really where a lot of treatment needs to be addressed, not just on the narrative or the autobiographical. It's helpful, but that's not where those memories are held. So it's very difficult to access that.
Yeah, it's more physical. It's
crazy. It is. And if we bring it back to the GI system for a second, because the GI system is such a tremendous signaler of safety or danger, right? This is that gut instinct that we all know.
Pun intended, yeah.
Right, that's right. So what are we saying when we say a gut instinct? It is the communication, bidirectional communication between brain and gut on, is this safe or is this dangerous? And a lot of that is implicit and procedural. We can't describe why we feel safe or why we feel in danger. We just feel it, right? That's implicit and procedural. And people who with chronic stress or trauma have a distorted view of what's safe and what's dangerous. Not through any fault of their own or personal failing, through experience.
So how do we go about, how can someone unlearn these captured survival responses?
Well, so I think the first thing to think about is that we are, our bodies and brains are predictive, meaning we're always trying to anticipate, based on what I've experienced in the past, what is most likely to occur next, right? So the way I see it and the way I describe it with my clients is I want to put you in situations in which your brain can now predict that it's going to be safe rather than dangerous to do this activity.
I see.
So that your brain can start to predict and say, hey, you know what? I've been here before and I didn't get hurt.
So you're sort of tricking the brain in a way. You're going to make its predictions, but you're going to set it up in an environment so those predictions are always safe and comfortable.
I'm not tricking it though, right? We're setting up the environment in which that prediction becomes the most likely outcome. So I'll give you like an example.
Yeah, right? Tricking wasn't the right word. You're right.
I know what you mean though. So, but I think it's important because tricking implies that there's something disingenuous about it, right? Whereas we're updating a person's model of what the world should be, and people who have had stress and trauma perceive the world as dangerous.
Really what I should say is it's already been tricked. It's already perceived something that's a comfort as a more traumatic.
That's right. And so the way that I think about it is, if we use a practical example. So let's say that someone comes in with every time they take a deep breath, they feel a pain in their rib cage. Right. or, in there. So they can't take deep breaths, or they have a hernia, right? And so I can't breathe, or I can't brace without feeling this pain in my groin. Okay. Well, the brain has basically assumed that every time there's a certain threshold of pressure or movement, some cue is reached, the brain already says, well, this is dangerous. So what we do is we come in and we say, okay, I'm going to put you in a position in which you don't perceive that danger. So in this case, if you can't take a deep breath, okay, we're going to breathe right below that deep breath. And I'm going to teach you a whole range of movements without taking such a deep breath. And the brain starts to say, hey, I can do more and more without that deep breath. And then we start edging a little bit more and a little bit more. And before you know it, a person's doing more than they thought they could do because their brain has updated the predictive model of the world. They can do more than they used to be able to.
And it's not misfiring and sending signals of pain too early.
Well, that's right. So again, we're coming back to this concept of self-regulation. I'm expanding the threshold of it a bit more. So really, if you think about like this old concept of graded exposure, this is a version of graded exposure. In other words, I'm putting you in graded exposure is basically increasing the challenge over time so that your body accommodates to that, just as you would do with working out. But the difference is that we're always updating how the brain is predicting this, if this is safe or is this dangerous.
Yeah, I think it does help to give a little bit more of examples. And by all means, we can talk about a little bit about the work we did. But I think to kind of paint the picture for people, coming in, you have this familiar, reoccurring issue that, I don't want to speak for your other clients, but I know for me, like, just wasn't ever going away with the things that I did. And I spent years trying to get this issue to be resolved. And at first it stemmed with my hip and my left side. And it was always a lot of tightness in my psoas muscle, but kind of like working with you, learning more of how neuromuscularly is also connected to a lot of my anatomy for digestion, for the mechanics of digestion.
That's right.
So that there was sort of like a way that they were actually synergistically working, unfortunately. But there was a lot of disruption that we had to do too. Like, I know we talked about graded exposure, but I think a major point that we did skip over in the healing aspect was we tried to break down the hijacking from happening. We tried to disrupt my vagus nerve. We tried to stop the cell signaling. And there was an aspect where I was flooding my senses, and I've starved my sensitivities, so I wasn't even like perceptive to the signals my body was sending.
Well, right. So I think, if you think about this from the context of, think about it just like you would think about learning any new skill. At the end of the day, all we're doing is teaching something different. We're teaching something new to your body, right? In order for you to do that, we have to first disrupt the old habitual pattern. So here's an example I always like to use for my clients. Imagine that you're at the top of a mountain and you're going to ski down, okay? That first pass down, it's untouched powder. So you can go anywhere. And all paths are the same. You can go anywhere without any resistance, right? Mm-hmm. But as soon as you go down that mountain for the first time, you come back up, you are more likely to fall into that same groove.
You made the grooves.
That's right. That's behavior, right? It's pattern, it's conditioned behavior. So pain is a conditioned behavior. Stress is a conditioned behavior. And so the more you go down that groove, the more likely it is that you will slide back into that groove, and the more difficult it is for you to get out. So what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to teach you a new way to get down this mountain. All right. And how we do it is we do two things. One, we have to stop going down that same groove. Mm-hmm. If we start going down that same groove, i.e. you get hijacked by that old pattern, then we don't let you go all the way down the mountain. In other words, we don't do all this stuff. As soon as we notice it, we redirect, right? Mm-hmm. So that you're getting out of that groove and into a new one. Then we also teach you a new way of doing, typically with less effort, less tension, and much more focus on what you're sensing and feeling, because then you're staying present to it. When you stay present to it, you're laying down all this new neurological pathways to say, hey, I can go down this mountain a different path. But when you go on autopilot, you get sucked right back down that old path.
It almost takes that hand walking to be tiptoed through, so that, right, like you said, you can presently be aware at each stage down the new track to say, no, this is how my brain's going to operate.
Well, and this is what people, I mean, in my opinion, everyone needs a coach or a mentor of some kind to help with that path, because if we could do it ourselves, we would have already done it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's the whole idea of the brain already thinking that it's right. So how's it going to detect something's wrong if it thinks it's already right?
That's right. That's right.
You
Or even if you know that something's not right, you don't have, by definition, the adaptability or the variability in that system to choose a new path. Because if you could have, you would have.
There wouldn't have been a problem. Right.
That's right.
It would have never hit the fan to begin with.
That's right. Right. So you've got a behavioral kind of construct that's really rigid. And so we want more flexibility. I want you to be able to go down this mountain 12 different ways, not just one.
And at the central nervous system level, is that where we get into, like, is now a good time to transition into the somatosensory cortex?
Well, I mean, so that's a big component of it, right? Because,
okay, just one component of it.
Well, right. So, what you feel in your body is a major component of how you're going to move in space, right? So,
like, again, making those predictions and making them accurate.
Right. So we want it to be closely paired between what you predict to happen and then how your body responds to the thing that you're doing.
Okay.
You don't want huge mismatches, because huge mismatches cause a tremendous amount of stress on the system, because it's all constantly trying to overcorrect.
And interoception is the ability to sense what's going on internally in our bodies, and proprioception is the ability to sense what the external demands of our body, what external senses demands of our bodies to do.
To some degree. So interoception is you're basically your felt sense. So the sensory representation of what is occurring in your body, what you feel in your body. Proprioception is your sense of position in space. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So proprioception informs interoception to a certain degree.
Right.
Because the position of my body.
Proprioceptor, yeah, okay.
Because the position of my body is going to influence how I feel in my body.
And
interoception is really important, because interoception is what lays the groundwork for how do I devote resources. So if I feel pain or ill, I'm going to devote resources differently than if I feel safe and relaxed and confident, right? So interoception is how the brain is basically determining where do we send resources to.
Okay. And the best way to improve your interoceptive skills are to work out with headphones on, be completely distracted, and look around the room while you're in the middle of a workout.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, it's the exact opposite, right? I know you're being sarcastic. It's like, dude, it's the exact opposite. The goal is to, if we want to improve interoception, the first thing we got to do is we got to sense it. We have to slow down enough to feel what is happening in my body.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's the biggest refrain. All of my clients will agree. That's the question I ask them the most. What do you feel in your body right now? Yeah. Because that question slows things down and makes you wonder, okay, well, what am I feeling? And does that actually violate the prediction that I already made?
Yeah, because
actually, that doesn't feel so bad. Well, maybe I can do that. Let me slow down and paying attention to that. And we just stretch that out and give it some time. And what we find is that it's like, oh, I can actually do this.
Right. And a lot of times we just don't give ourselves the opportunity. Like, I love that quote that you taught me a long time ago of flooding our senses and starving our sensitivities, because eventually if something's trying to send you a pain signal and you keep ignoring it, and that pain signal goes higher and higher, well, eventually you're going to deaden your own internal senses to being aware of that pain response. And now you might even be doing more irreparable damage. Just living with that pain.
Pain is a wonderful pain, and sensitivity in general is a wonderful gift.
Mm-hmm.
It's what it's allowed us to survive for, as long as we have as a species, because we've been hypersensitive. But with that comes great responsibility. right? So it's like, it's like kind of the Uncle Ben quote from Spider-Man: with great power comes great responsibility. It's with great sensitivity comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
And because it feels like a lot for a lot of people, we would rather dissociate from it because I don't feel like I can actually manage it. And the result is a lot of damaging and injurious behaviors.
Well, and that's really what I was kind of getting at when I was joking about the gym aspect, was more kind of steering the conversation to the bigger picture of like, man, why is this such an issue, and why is this such an issue in the last 100 years? And then looking at things as, yeah, we live in a faster paced society year over year. More often than not, do people want to just get through with their exercise and get on with their day? And kind of like what you said, they don't perceive that they can get through it. So what do? They put some headphones on, or they down 500 milligrams of caffeine in a pre-workout so they can feel like they can handle everything. And in reality, yeah, they are just doing more damage than good because they're just not being present. And if people could just be, it's just cool because like the underlying solution is mindfulness, presence.
It is often a solution to a lot of things, is just paying attention to what you're doing. And we are, so distracted that it's very difficult for us to learn anything new when you're.
Well, why do you think that? I mean, maybe a couple thoughts of why you think we are living in a much more distracted environment, or why we see so many GI issues, autoimmune issues in the last 100 years. I mean, could we really say it's all because of the way we're using herbicides and pesticides?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a strong component, but I think it's so multifactorial, right? I mean, I think that we are really disconnected from what it feels like to be in our body, right? We don't really know what
Yeah.
it's like to be in our body. We find that it's scary. I think we've lost a lot of wisdom about how intuitively our bodies work. We've outsourced our wisdom about how our body works to practitioners.
Right. Right.
And
I'll just go to the doctor. They'll tell me what to do. I don't even have to think.
Right. And I think that's a really big disservice because we've been evolving for, hundreds of thousands of years in Homo sapien form to understand how our bodies work. Right. And it doesn't mean that we don't need help. I think we do need coaches and people to help us guide us. But at the end of the day, you need to be your own inner physician, your own inner physical therapist. But that takes a lot of work. And I think that leads to the second problem, which is we don't have enough time because we are constantly distracted and doing things that are unnecessary for our fulfillment, but perhaps necessary for our, materialistic kind of viewpoint, that we fill our time with unnecessary things.
With things, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
and the result is like we just have to outsource our own health and our own wisdom to someone else. And the reality is no one, no matter how skilled, will ever know your body better than you.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody can be the host like you are. Right.
That's right. So I think, do I think pesticides and herbicides are a big problem in the toxic load of our environment compared to 100 years ago? I think it's a huge problem. But I think just as much of a problem is the toxic load on our minds from being disconnected from nature and disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah. And just kind of the demand on our brains to have to discern through so much information on a daily basis. It's overloaded, and you can understand why it's made mistakes along the way, made errors in perceptions, and captured wrong things. It misinterpreted them.
Well, look at it this way, right? So you mentioned autoimmunity, right? Well, what is autoimmunity? The inability of the immune system to tell self from non-self, right? To tell the difference between self and others.
And sometimes it literally attacks itself. Right.
So I would argue that the same thing is happening on a more social level, right? We can't tell the difference between safety and danger. We can't tell the difference between what's mine and what's somebody else's. Like all these boundaries and everything are so blurred that, of course we would have autoimmune conditions in our own body because we have an autoimmune condition towards our own world.
Yeah. I love that because it personifies, right? It starts on the cellular level and then
it's
it
fractal.
manifests into
It's
the
fractal.
larger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. If I don't know how my body works, and I don't take the time to understand it, then why wouldn't my cells do the same thing?
Right. Seth, we only have like 5 minutes left here, and I wanted to ask you a couple more questions, but it's been a pleasure so far, and I look forward to more conversations with you. But real quick, favorite lift? I always ask everyone that comes on the show, what's your favorite lift?
I really enjoy pull-ups.
All right. I like it.
Yeah.
Is that a pull-up bar in the back there? No, I'm just
No, I know, right? I have one in my garage right across the wall there. But yeah, I think pull-ups are great.
I like it.
I'm a big fan of things that we would have to do, ancestrally, and pulling your own body weight up is.
Oh, for sure. That would that's life or death situation, hundreds of years ago, for sure.
That's right. Yep.
Favorite quote? Maybe not a favorite all around quote, but just something that comes to mind today.
One of the quotes that I really enjoy that I always kind of tell myself is every step is the path. And you're doing this thing because this is the thing that you're doing. You're meant to do it because that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Every step is the path. I love it. That's very great. Very trite and true. And then the last thing I wanted to leave our listeners with is just talking a little bit about what you're working on. Seth and I get the pleasure of chatting during our sessions every other week, and he was telling me about how he is working on a modality to help correct his vision.
Yeah. Well, basically, so I'm been nearsighted since so myopia since I was in the first grade. And, essentially what happens is with nearsightedness, your eyeball grows long axially. So front to back, it's too long. So images are refracting in front of the retina. So what happens, and there's a variety of reasons that we can get nearsighted, but what happens is you go to your optometrist and you say, I can't see the chalkboard, which was my case. So they sit you in this dark room 20 feet away. They have you look at a Snellen chart, and they basically calibrate a lens so that you can see that clearly. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that then you use that lens for up close work, but you can see up close okay. So then you start wearing those lenses over time, and that causes a spasm in the ciliary muscle of the lens. And if you guys want to look this up, it's called hyperopic defocusing. But what that does is that causes the eyeball to continue to lengthen because it's trying to balance images near and far while trying to overcome the lens that you're now wearing. So, now I'm doing this work where I'm basically trying to retrain my eyes to see and to shorten them front to back using differential lenses. So I basically am retraining my lens to focus and actually do the work versus my glasses doing it for me. And so I've been able to reduce my prescription by about 25%, like maintaining 20/20 vision.
And it's like Invisalign in that you take it, you change the lens just a little bit at a time.
Right. So I have a distance. That's right. So I have a distance lens that's slightly undercorrected, meaning it's slightly blurry. And then I have glasses that I wear up close that are about 1.5 diopters, which is the prescription, less. So my eyes are slightly blurry at, arm length away. And then every couple of months I chip away at that. So I'm basically training my lens to actually do what it's supposed to do, which is change the aperture just like a camera.
It's pretty amazing. And then real quick, you said how many prescription numbers you've changed it already?
So I started out with negative 6.25. So the higher the number, the worse the vision. Right. And now I'm at negative 4.5, still with 20/20 vision. So I've reduced it by, 25%. So
in 2 months, how long has that been?
It's been a little longer than that. So it's been like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Now that's pretty rapid. Now that will start to slow down most likely, and so it'll take me probably another couple of years to get down to 20/20 without glasses. Hopefully, even if I don't get all the way there, it's still really, I think, cool.
Oh, it's fascinating just to prove what the body's capable of, and like you said, it's always going to try to predict and impress you. So how can we stimulate it in the right direction to work for us rather than against us? So
that's right.
Exactly. I think that's the name of the game here. And where can people go to find you?
Well, one thing I'll just say, just to kind of close out with that, is your system is always changing. The key is which direction do we want it to change? So the same principles of change of plasticity can either be used to deepen the existing pattern or create new ones. So your system is always plastic. But if we do the same thing over and over, then that just gets deeper and deeper into a pattern, right? So we have unlimited, well, I wouldn't say unlimited, but we have a tremendous capacity to change if given the proper stimulation.
I love it. Yeah, systems always changing. Which direction do you want it to go?
That's exactly right. Yep. To answer your question about where to find me, you can find me I have a website, sethoberst.com. And then I also have you can find me on social media, Instagram at Seth Oberst.
And I'll leave links in the show notes for people so they can contact you in case they want to reach out.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Happy to chat. Yeah. But cool. Yeah, you can email me through my website or, message me on social media. And
we will be trying to get you back on the show because it's a pleasure chatting with you. Always enjoy conversations with you, Seth. So thank you.
That sounds great. I appreciate the opportunity, man.
Cool. And I'll see you later today, man.
Sounds good.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.